Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Okay, right now we are going to revisit a trial that we covered here on the network that really was quite memorable. It was out of Wisconsin, and it was the trial of George Burch, the man who was eventually found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in connection with the brutal killing of Nicole Vanderheiden, a young mother of 3. Now, the reason we're bringing this case up is there's been a latest development. A court has ordered George Burch to now pay restitution to the victims of this heinous attack. And we're going to talk about what that means. But before we do, let's just dissect this case a little bit. Nicole Vanderheiden was out one night with her boyfriend and friends. She gets separated after having a fight with her boyfriend, Douglas Detrie. And then after leaving a bar, she's eventually found 3 miles from her home. Her body was found beaten and she was strangled. At first, authorities went and looked at Douglas Detrie. You see him in that picture. They first ruled him as a suspect. He was eventually ruled out, and based upon DNA evidence and cell phone evidence, they were able to tie it to George Burch. Now, the prosecution says that he met up with Nicole Vanderheiden that night, and when she rebuked his advances, his sexual advances, he killed her. This has been a fascinating case to study because George Burch took the stand and said not only did he not do it, that he could point the finger to the person who really did kill Nicole, Douglas Detrie. He claims that he was fooling around with her outside of her home when he was hit in the head, knocked semi-unconscious, and when he woke up to her dead body and Douglas Detrie standing over him with a gun. He then forced George Burch to bury the body, and George Burch was eventually able to escape. That was the story. That was an interesting plot. We never heard this quite before. Now let's dissect a little bit more into this case, and let's begin with Douglas Detrie, because anybody who was following this case was watching every word he had to say. Take a look.
The area of questioning was that Nikki had left the watering hole with a group of your friends. And do you know about how long after Nikki left the watering hole did you or Greg start to receive some information that you should come down to the sardine can?
I don't exactly recall if she had said something about the sardine can in the short phone conversation we had, but probably received some text from her, I don't know, I'm guessing 15, 20 minutes after that point.
In your short phone conversation that you had with Nikki while you were still at the watering hole, was she at the sardine can at that time?
No, I remember her saying, I think they were in the parking lot in the car about to leave.
Was Nikki upset with you at that point in time?
No, she didn't seem to be.
Shortly thereafter, you indicated that you received some text messages?
Yes.
At some point, did Nikki send you a series of angry text messages?
Yes, she did.
Do you recall the content of those angry text messages?
I don't specifically recall exactly what they were. I know they were, I don't know, I don't really want to guess, but they're like, what girl am I talking to, or something on the lines of that, and some other comments that I didn't know where they were coming from. And
is it fair to say that some of those text messages were really rather upset or derogatory?
Yes, they were.
Do you recall if any of your responses to her text messages were angry responses?
No.
Do you recall using a vulgar language with her in response?
No.
And why did you not respond in a vulgar or upset way?
Well, I wasn't upset, and I think I just kind of thought she was upset for an unknown reason, and that there wasn't really a reason for it.
And in fact, is it fair to say your responses were, you mentioned LOL or LOL, stop it, Nikki?
Yep.
And then just saying that you would be there soon or find her?
Yep, that I'd meet her at the sardine can or whatever. I'll be there soon.
Do you recall if the derogatory text messages then continued even after that?
I believe they did, yes.
And at any point in response to those messages, did you get upset with Nikki?
No, I didn't.
In fact, at one point she did send a text message that said, "You hurt me all the time."
Yes, she did.
And we're going to talk about Douglas Detrie's testimony, but before we do, Randy Zelin's with us right now. And Randy, I have to talk to you about the latest development in this case. After George Burch is convicted and sentenced, he has now been ordered to pay restitution to that man on the stand, the boyfriend, for everything from losses and expenses, lost wages, to counseling and associated costs. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Some of it, yes. Some of it, no. The no part is this notion of compensating someone for lost wages as a result of, for example, being in court and testifying. Something like that, except if you're an expert witness, where expert witnesses get compensated for testifying, but they're not fact witnesses, they're expert witnesses. They're being paid for their expertise. But to suddenly now monetize a witness's testimony, because that's in essence what you're doing. The judge is basically saying you're entitled to be paid to come in and testify. To me, that's weird. And to me, it opens the door to, well, maybe the next person will start negotiating with the prosecutors. Hey, listen, I just want to let you know before I agree to testify, how much am I being paid? That's ridiculous. And it also opens up the door to, is your testimony now bought and paid for? Can you cross-examine a witness? Sir, isn't it true that you expect the judge to award you compensation in return for your testimony? I mean, it's crazy. From that perspective, I've never seen it before.
Yeah, he's been ordered to pay more than $37,000 in restitution, and not just to Douglas Detrie, but Nicole Vanderheiden's mother, Nicole Vanderheiden's sister, for everything from lost wages to the cost of the headstone for Nicole Vanderheiden. And I want to talk more about this with you because, and he's also been ordered to pay to the Wisconsin Crime Victim Compensation Fund. I want to talk about this with you more, Randy, and whether or not he's even going to be able to pay. But really, as we continue on with the saga of George Burch, let's continue on when he took the stand and pointed the finger at Douglas Detrie, the boyfriend, the man he's now having to pay. So let's see what happened when he went on the stand.
And you said the bartender, I think you said her name was Brandy, had your drink ready when you got there?
Yes, sir.
And what did you say your drink was again?
Jack and Coke.
So you were drinking on this night?
Yes, sir.
Did you go alone to
Yes, sir.
At some point when you were there, did you end up meeting someone who you now know as Nicole Vanderheiden?
Yes, sir.
Tell us more about that.
I was in the bar area, went out before, had a cigarette, came back, was standing there, and I don't know if I was watching TV or what it was, or talking amongst friends around me, but I noticed there was a fairly attractive blonde woman standing next to me.
What was she doing?
I believe she was getting a drink. I'm not sure. I just, there's a couple people over here, and she was over here, and I started talking to her, just making conversation.
Okay, so you noticed her and started talking to her?
Yes, sir.
Do you remember? Do you remember if you approached her, if she approached you? I guess kind of describe for us as best as you can.
I just went to the side and saw that she was standing there, and she didn't seem to be with anybody. She was by herself, and I just kind of struck up a conversation. She was right in the vicinity, right next to me.
Did you see her walk in with anybody?
No.
Did you see her walk in?
I don't remember her walking, her coming in or where she came in, because you can come in through the front or the back, and I just remember looking over, and she was standing close to my area at the bar.
You did pull over?
Yes, sir.
What happened after that?
We sat there and talked for a few minutes.
Okay. What happened after that?
Started fooling around, messing around a little bit. Started kissing.
And at this point, you were still in the driver's seat?
Yes, sir.
She was still in the front passenger seat?
Yes, sir.
And I don't want to get into too many details, but you said you were fooling around?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean to you?
Kissing. I was kissing her neck a little bit, touching each other.
Did you guys stay in the front seat?
No, sir.
Where'd you go?
The back seat, the Blazer.
How did you get into the back seat?
I got out of the driver's side and walked around to the back passenger.
Do you remember how she got in the back seat?
I don't remember if she got out, hopped in the back, or she just...
Randy, isn't the thing about him testifying, the jury didn't believe him. They obviously didn't believe his version of events. But could it be, even if you take the prosecution's theory, which the jury ultimately sided with, that some of what he's saying could be true?
Well, what you do is, and I think what happened here, the defense chose, rather than shooting at a bullseye and trying to get the bullseye, they shot first and then drew the bullseye. In other words, they already knew that Detrie had been a suspect.
Right.
He had been locked up for 18 days.
Right.
They also knew that there was some tension, there was some problems,
right.
There was stuff going on. They also at some point know that that Birch's DNA is on her.
Right.
So if you're going to now construct the defense, there's an old saying in our business: you deny what you dare not admit, and you admit what you dare not deny. He has to admit that he was with her because his DNA is on her. So, okay, what's my defense beginning to look like? Well, you can see what it's beginning to look like. Here's a woman, she just had a fight with her boyfriend, her fiance, her husband. She's upset. I'm at a bar, she's at a bar. We have things in common. We've both been through rough times. And whether it's to get back at her boyfriend or because she's just feeling it, we hook up. Here comes angry, enraged boyfriend, sees us fooling around. He kills her and then frames me.
Now, the prosecution said that, yes, he and Nicole were together that night, but according to their theory, yes, we can place them together, but she rebuked his advances. They weren't fooling around like he claims. He tried something, she pushed away, he got violent, strangled, and killed her. I want to talk more about this theory, and I also want to talk about the latest development that he has to now pay restitution to the victims of this heinous crime, but that's all going to have to be right after this break. We'll be right back. Law&Crime, everybody. We're talking about and revisiting the trial of George Burch, the man who was convicted of killing Nicole Vanderheiden. Interesting trial to follow because this man went on the stand and said that not only did he not do it, he can point the finger at the man who really did kill Nicole. And that was, he said, Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas Detrie. Where we last left off in his testimony, he was talking about that, yes, he was fooling around with Nicole that night after meeting her at a bar. They're outside of her house. He's fooling around, and then bam, he gets hit in the head. Let's see what he had to say.
What do you mean?
I noticed someone or something laying in the back behind the truck or behind the Blazer.
What did you see? I mean, exactly that you remember.
Once my attention got to that area, I looked closer and I realized that it was Nicole laying there.
Was that the first time, I guess, you had seen her since you were having intercourse?
Yes, sir.
Did you know if she was alive or dead at that point?
I didn't know if she was alive. There was a lot of blood on her face, coming out of her mouth, on her back. But I couldn't, she wasn't physically moving.
So you first encountered her as you were I guess when you were walking towards the rear of the vehicle, and when you got to the rear of the vehicle, that's when you encountered her?
Right. She was laying on the actual street of asphalt behind the vehicle.
Okay, Randy, you're a brilliant attorney. Let's say you heard that for the first time, okay? Talking about that he's fooling around with her, gets hit over the head, wakes up, Nicole's dead, Douglas Detrie has a gun pointed towards him. What do you make of that story?
In a vacuum, it's interesting. And if you line that up with the earlier testimony from Mr. Detrie, where clearly there was an issue, there were problems, there was tension. Maybe he does decide to go there and sees them and flies off into a rage. So far, so good. Remember, they shot and then drew. But then you have the scratch of the record because, as we all know, there was one little problem with their theory, which was that there was objective scientific proof that Mr. Detrie could not have been anywhere in the vicinity. And you say to yourself, how could they not have known that before they put him on the stand?
You're talking, of course, about the Fitbit data, which I want to talk to you about, but not quite yet. Let's continue on with George Burch. We want to talk about that and the latest development in this case, but let's continue on more with his testimony from this trial.
Did her position in your arms eventually change?
Eventually, I had to, when I had turned around, I was looking at his direction. I couldn't hold her legs at the same time, so I ended up dropping her legs, but still holding I had my arms underneath her arms or armpit area.
So at some point, I think what you're saying is her feet are on the ground, but you're still holding her by her armpit?
Right, I'm holding her up, and her feet are more. I'm standing this way. I dropped her feet, and she was kind of like we were at a little bit of an angle at the I'd say the beginning, of where it starts to go down, just where the ground descends down.
You said at some point you're facing Detrie?
Yes, sir.
What's going on at that point?
He was basically telling me to put her down and put her in that area, or place her in the area where I was, and he was instructing me on what to do.
So if her feet are on the ground as you described, and yet you still have to move her body, are you essentially dragging her?
When I had let her go, he had pretty much stopped, and I was at the area pretty much where I had been instructed to let her go at.
Randy, bunch to talk about. First, what we were just talking about as we were watching it, you talked about the level of specificity as something is notable in his testimony.
Yes, because what you do as a defense attorney, no matter who your witness, and by the way, prosecution as well, the government attorneys, you want your witnesses to be specific. Facts persuade. So he does a very good job being very specific. There's only one problem.
What's that?
His testimony defies common sense because the most important things he has no recollection over. Conveniently, I got hit over the head when she was murdered.
Gets hit over the head, doesn't remember what happened, kind of unconscious, kind of not. He's a much bigger man than Douglas Detrie, and he has no mark on the back of his head.
Yes, and then add to that the fact you just were having sex with a stranger. You wake up, she's dead, and a guy has a gun in your face, and you're able to testify to that level of specificity about what happened afterwards, feet dangling, not dangling, under her arms. Who the hell would remember all of that if you just lived that nightmare?
Now, I could talk so much about this, but I'm being told I think we have to hit a commercial. So when we come back, I want to talk about that Fitbit data. We have a lot more to talk about in the George Burch trial, so we'll be right back here on Law and Crime. Welcome back. everybody. We're still revisiting the George Burch trial in light of the latest development, which we'll talk about in a minute. But before we do, we're still analyzing when George Burch took the stand and said that he didn't kill Nicole Vanderheiden, that really it was Douglas Detrie, Nicole's boyfriend, and that he was the innocent victim in all this. Let's continue on with his testimony.
Do you know who that individual was?
Never seen him before in my life.
Do you know who that individual is now?
Now I do.
Who was it?
It was that Detrie.
So let's keep moving. You both get in the vehicle, and what happens next?
I was told to. I was parked on the right side of the street, and I was told to turn the vehicle around. So I don't recall if it was a Y turn or a U turn, but I turned the vehicle around and went in the opposite direction of what the vehicle was facing.
Did you have your seatbelt on?
No, I actually tried to put it on, and you've seen on movies before and things like that, and the only thing that come to my mind, the only option I had at that time was to wreck the car. And that's when I thought to reach for my seatbelt and put my seatbelt on. And then I was advised, don't even fucking think about it, don't touch it. When I reached up to grab it.
Were you in pain at this point?
I don't recall. It was more adrenaline pumping. I wouldn't say pain. I wasn't aware of it. I was more shaken and adrenaline just in the moment at the time.
Were you bleeding?
Not that I'm aware of, sir. I had blood on me, but I don't think it was mine.
So you turned the vehicle around?
Yes, sir.
So you were heading back towards the way you originally came from?
Yes, sir.
Keep walking us through that, George. What happened next?
I was driving, and while I was driving, I was told where to turn and which ways to go. I remember turning, I don't remember which direction we turned, but I remember, I want to say it was like a four-way, maybe a stop sign or something, and then I was told to turn it, I want to say it was left. I don't remember, to be completely honest. I just remember I was told directions on which way to go and where to turn.
What was what was Detrie's demeanor like at this point?
Still behind me, still being forceful, telling me what to do. As far as I could tell, from what I could see from the glancing in the rearview mirror, he still had the firearm on me and was still sitting in that same direction behind me.
While you were driving, did he ever touch you with the firearm?
He nudged me. I can't say what it was that hit me. From what I've seen in his hands, I believe that's what it was, right behind me on this side. But for certain, I can't say.
So he's telling you to turn whatever he's telling you. Go straight, go left, go right.
Yes, sir.
For the most part, were you on a paved street?
Yes, sir. Lined road, paved road.
All right, Randy, besides discussing the maybe inconsistencies or weird things in his version of events, you had mentioned that science doesn't quite back up with what he's saying. Can you elaborate on the big novelty issue in this case, Fitbit data?
Correct. The Fitbit data, apparently Mr. Detrie was wearing a Fitbit, and the Fitbit established that he was nowhere near there and could not have done all of the things that Mr. Birch said he did, including Nicole and forcing him, Mr. Birch, to dispose of the body.
Now,
so that's ridiculous, number one.
But the defense had a lot of issues with Fitbit data being used here, partially because it's such a new kind of technology. What's your theory on it being used in criminal cases like this?
Well, look, when you're talking about science, when you're talking about expert testimony from a scientific point of view. It is all a matter of, first of all, is this reliable? Is the jury entitled to rely on it? Is it good enough to be allowed for the jury to consider? Right. And then, of course, like any other expert testimony, is it helpful to the jury to decide what happened? So the Fitbit is a killer, excuse the pun. But the other thing that's a killer here, Mr. Detrie, according to Mr. Burch, killed Nicole. I'll let you live.
That's a huge point. And I want to see what happened with the jury. Did the jury buy his story? Let's see. We got the verdict for you right now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've been advised that you've reached a verdict. Is that correct? Then if you would pass the verdict forms over to the bailiff. State of Wisconsin versus George Stephen Birch, Brown County case 16 CF 1309. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, George Stephen Birch, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, is charged in the information. It is signed by our foreperson and dated this first day of March 2018. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? Yes. They're saying yes and shaking their heads. Does either party wish to have the jury polled?
Yes, Judge.
All right. There's a right to have the jury polled at this time, and this is how it will work. The juror right to the left of the bailiff. If that is your verdict, just you may say, yes, this is my verdict. If not, you can answer, no, this is not my verdict, and we'll just go down the row and around. So, is this your verdict?
Yes.
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 All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have one last instruction to read to you. Your service in this case is completed.
Found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Randy, now we know the reason we're talking about this is he has been ordered by the court to pay restitution to the victims of this attack, of this murder, to Nicole van der Heiden's mother, to Nicole van der Heiden's sister, and in fact to Douglas Detrie. And also he has a payment to something called the Wisconsin Crime Victim Compensation Fund. This is over $37,000. He's not going to, is he going to be able to pay this? And if he can't, what happens?
Well, again, there's a few interesting things going on here. Let's start with the easy stuff. Yes, it's perfectly appropriate for a crime victims compensation fund to be eligible to receive money. It is also in the context of a wrongful death suit, a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit for family members who, let's say, would rely on the deceased person for income, the pain and suffering. That's all perfectly appropriate. But this notion of, I'm going to pay you for coming to testify is kind of crazy. To your question, can he pay for it? No, he can't pay for it. So if he's making 35 cents an hour in the jail, could they technically take that and he'll have less money at the commissary? Yeah, but that's about the only way they're getting it.
It's similar because this past week we talked about Chris Watts having a wrongful death lawsuit filed against him and how he's not going to fight it. And the question is, well, if he ever tried to profit off of the murders through a book, a movie deal, all the profits that he would receive, all those proceeds would go to the family. So I'm not saying that's what George Burch would do, but it's something to think about. Randy, I want you to stick around, so we'll be right back here on Law&Crime.